I grew up in a suburb of St. Louis, Missouri, and I always liked the outdoors. I liked plants, I liked animals, I collected shells, I collected fossils, um, all that kind of stuff. Um, and so even before I knew that there were university jobs that dealt with sort of out of doors natural history kinds of things, I knew about museums. So if you asked me when I was 8 years old, I would have said I wanted to work in a museum because that's what I knew about. And I don't remember when, but certainly by junior high, I knew that there were professors and what a professor's job was. So I said, yep, that's what I want to do. So very boring. Always known what I want to do. So when I went to college, we had a single biology major, but you could pick your courses within that. And I took ecology, I took plant biology, I tailored my coursework. Came out of college and applied to grad school. And it was a very good college I went to, so I had a very good idea of what I wanted to do, where I wanted to go to grad school. Went there, they took me, I went there, got a fellowship. I had skipped a grade in school, so I started grad school when I was 21. I graduated when I was 25, let me think, 26. I was 26 when I got my PhD. I did a year of postdocing. And I came here when I was 27 years old. And I've been here ever since. I came into this office as an assistant professor and went up through the ranks as typical. One of the things that students often don't actually know is that there is kind of a difference here, different kinds of academic jobs. The assistant professor, associate professor, full professor is a job that puts a very, very high focus on research. So most of my teaching is actually teaching graduate students. I run a lab, I supervise postdocs, we're expected to get grants and publish and so on. And each of us who are assistant, associate, or full professors also teach at least one lecture course to undergraduates. So right now I teach ecology, Bio 373, which is the upper division majors course. I start all my courses off this way. There's many meanings of the word ecology, but in academics, we use the scientific meaning of the word is the study of relationships between living organisms and each other, living organisms and their physical environment. Okay? It's not environmental issues. It's not the environment. So when I say I'm an ecologist, I study relationships between plants and the animals that eat them, plants and the other plants they compete with, plants and the physical environment, including things like the effect of soils and fire. We're very interested in how fire affects plants. And I look at plants at the level typically of populations or communities. So a lot of the research that goes on in my lab there's always a basic science question. That's part of the game of being a professor here. But I'm allowed to take on projects that not only have a good basic science component, but also have an applied component too. And most of my grad students really want to do something very applied, meaning applied to some real world problem. So we study invasive species, which are non-native species that come in and outcompete the natives, and they're one of the reasons we lose native biodiversity. We study endangered species, one in particular we've done a lot of work on. It's almost extinct. It lives here in Austin, and it's almost extinct, and you know, it needs a lot. We're studying it, and that helps, but it also needs political support, and it needs land to grow on, and you know, when you come to these applied problems like invasive species or endangered species, it's not just science. The scientist is only one component of what the problem needs. You know, we can discover things, but no species ever got saved by being studied. No invasive species ever got controlled by just being studied. The science has to translate into something that people do. And that means you have to have money, you have to have political will, you have to have lots of things have to happen as well. It's just we also work with plant communities a lot. We've been studying the effects of deer. You may not know that there's way too many white-tailed deer around here, and they eat up the plants. And we've been studying the effects of fire, because you may not know this, but most of the vegetation in this region was once burned regularly. And if you don't burn it, things don't work very well. So example, one of the things that we've studied, for example, is oak trees. Beautiful oak trees all over campus, right? And if you go for a walk anywhere in a park or something, beautiful oak trees, right? The green belt. But if you look, you'll find little bitty oak trees this big. Camera can see this maybe. And you'll find big trees. But you'll find almost no trees about 4 feet high. One of the problems is there isn't enough light for the little trees to grow up. And another is that the deer just nip, 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 nip. There's so many deer that they just nibble the oaks right down. So we've been studying that and collecting data to prove those two statements I just made. But what would it take to get oak regeneration? Well, you have to be willing to open up the forest canopy enough, like fires used to do, to get light in. And you'd have to be willing to do something about the deer. Is anybody willing to do something about the deer? No, it's Bambi. Kill Bambi? Murder Bambi? So it's a real political problem. So we can show that the deer are part of the problem. But, in Austin, a lot of people would like to control the deer because cars run into them. I don't know if any of you have any friends that live up near Far West. You know that Far West area? A lot of students live up there.
Here in Austin?
Yeah.
Oh, maybe the area.
Tons of deer up there. You go for a walk early in the morning or late at dusk, you'll see dozens and dozens, tons of deer up there. So many that most, people who have gardens have like chicken wire covering the plants because the deer eat all the plants. But the city tries to say we need to control the deer. We need to send out a professional wildlife biologist to euthanize some of them. And the public just goes crazy. Don't want that. Murder Bambi? I remember working with a bunch of environmental activist students once, years and years and years ago, and explaining that why deer hunting is good and they shouldn't be against deer hunting because it helps control deer in the region. Well, you can't hunt in the city, but out in the country you can hunt. Once I explained it, they stopped being anti-hunting, but what they wanted to do was bring back the wolf. Can you imagine the politics of reintroducing wolves into Texas? It's not going to happen. I'll just tell you, it's not going to happen. Anyway, so deer, fire, competition between plants, soils, effects of soils. But all this has a lot to do with land management, both ranch management and also conservation management. If we don't get our oaks to start regenerating, then when the big old ones die in 100 years, there will be no habitat for the endangered warbler. It's an endangered bird. So there's a lot of conservation applications, but also ranching, because that's the primary use of the land around here. Are you all city kids?
Yeah.
Yes? Yeah, okay. There's a wonderful world of rural Texas out there. It's just wonderful. There's a wonderful world of plants and animals. As you said, you're interested in herpetology, so it's a wonderful world. But even here in Austin, if you have a Sunday afternoon, you can go for a walk on the Greenbelt or along Shoal Creek, or there's lots of ways to get outside and start looking at plants and animals and rocks and fossils and all kinds of things if you're interested in that. But have any of you had any kind of outdoor I don't mean playing like soccer on the soccer field. I mean like nature.
Well, my dad does own some land out in Bertram, and there's a stock tank there where when I was younger, I'd always go and find leopard frogs.
Yeah. So you had a bit of a rural experience, even though you grew up in the city. Yeah. Any of the rest of you had any kind of experience like that?
I went to Africa.
Yes.
Yeah. East Africa, specifically Eritrea. That's where my family's from. We have a house over there, and it's very rural. Like they keep like donkeys and stuff like that. But
it's ranching country as well. Like Texas, it's very dry. And so it's ranching country. Here, the major things they raise are cattle, and also, you may not know this, the goats, the long-haired goats we use for mohair. But there, you're going to get donkeys and plain old goats.
Yeah,
A
a
lot
lot
of
of
those, some cattle.
Some, yeah, but it was mostly, and like horses and stuff. It was just very dry.
It's very dry. It's very dry. Yes. So that's a little bit of experience with a rural environment. Yeah. And there are many people who either go overseas in the tropics to do their research as graduate students or as postdocs, or at some point in their career, start to study ecological questions in overseas and often apply their expertise to real world problems. I mean, one of the problems in East Africa in general is too many grazing and browsing animals for the amount of food there is there. We also have that problem on Texas ranches. Not because, in Eritrea, it's because people are poor and they need to have as many. It's a poverty issue.
Yeah.
In Texas ranches, it's an ignorance issue because almost all of these ranches are just, they're not paying for themselves. They're basically a hobby. And people are not having to pay the mortgage and feed the kids and pay for your college tuition's not being paid by the ranch, I will bet, and your family's income and your food and you know what I mean. And so it's just ignorance to have too many cattle on the land, whereas in much of Africa, it's just there aren't enough other jobs for people.
I see in the hallway there was like some bees. Are you guys sitting?
That is Dr. Jo. Yes, she's up on the 4th floor, and her lab studies bees and as pollinators. They pollinate. The posters on this floor, I've got several posters from my lab. You'll see pictures of the local, forests and grasslands. Because I like nature. I like plants. I like animals. I thought they were cool. I thought they were interesting. That's simple. Oh, that I can answer that. Biology is the science of the study of living organisms. Okay, so picture biology. Under biology, you can divide it two ways. You can either divide it by organisms, plants, animals, microorganisms, bacteria and viruses. Think of that as being divided like this, vertically. You can divide it horizontally by the level at which you study things. So at the very bottom level, we have biochemistry, because that's, just one step above chemistry itself. Above that, you might have molecular biology. Above that, cell biology. Above that, organismal biology, which is what a lot of medicine is like looking at the whole organism and how it behaves. And then above that, you would have ecology and evolution. And ecology goes on from the individual on up to the ecosystem. So we're all biologists, okay? It's not an either or. My particular piece is this top layer of the layer cake called ecology, and the slice called plant, and the slice called plants. Okay, so I'm a botanist because I study plants, and I'm an ecologist because that's the level at which I work in biology. But we're all of us, from top to bottom. So it's not an either or, if that helps. So herpetology, the animal slice can be sliced more finely into mammals and birds and arthropods and worms and so on. And herps, which is for the rest of you, herps is amphibians and reptiles, is sort of a sub-slice, the animal slice. Another way to do it, if you can really complicate it now, we've got this layer cake with slices, but you could slice it this way, working terrestrially on land or marine and freshwater and marine. So we have people at this university who work, who study organisms that live in Hawaii. So obviously the fish people would fit that. So there's another way. So there's sort of 3 ways to slice it. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Yeah. So
Thank
not either ors. And all of us pretty much wear at least 2 hats because there's a level at which we work, but it's also what organisms do we work on. So. When I was 5, I wanted to be a ballerina. When I was 6, it was very clear to me, the ballet teacher, my mother, and everybody else was born klutz. So once that particular little girl's dream died, I always liked the outdoors. I liked plants, animals. Like I said, I collected fossils. I collected shells. I brought home a dead mole once, and I brought home a caterpillar that my mother put in a jar so we could watch it pupate, and it turned into this gorgeous big green cecropia moth. I just always enjoyed all that. And the interest predated even knowing that the career I have exists. Like I said, there was a period in my childhood when if you asked me what I wanted to do, I would have said museum job because I knew about museums, but I didn't know about this kind of job. Yes, I can tell you all about cedars. There's nothing wrong with cedars themselves. They're a native plant. It's like deer, or a native animal. I've got, they're not invasives from somewhere else that we have a problem with. They're natives. And so when you have too many of a native species, what you have is an ecosystem out of balance because it's been mismanaged. Too many cacti, too many prickly pears on the ranch means you overgrazed it. The equivalent in Africa would be some of those really thorny weeds that the animals just won't eat. Everywhere in the world, when you overgraze, you get some very nasty plants come in. It's not, this is just, natives that are out of control.
Right.
The reason we have so many cedars, junipers, is mostly because we no longer burn like we should. What kept the ranches open with a lot of grass is the same thing that kept them open with a lot of grass when it was Native Americans managing this landscape. Fire. They burned, they burned, they burned, and they burned. And we know they burned a lot. This was, like much of Africa, a fire-managed landscape. And it's been fire-managed as long as people have been here. The other thing, so if you don't burn, then fire-sensitive plants can come on in. And they get more and more and more abundant. The other reason that it's particularly juniper that's getting so abundant and not some other woody plants is because deer will not eat juniper. I don't know if you've ever tasted juniper. Do it. It won't hurt you. It won't hurt you, I promise. But I always have my classes do this. Take a little twig, take a little bit of needles, and then you spend the next half hour going, because it's how do you describe it? It's like chewing on a tea bag, I guess, or something. I don't know. It's full of tannins. Yeah, it's a puckery kind of thing. I mean, remember junipers are what give gin its flavor. I mean, it's absolutely not poisonous. Perfectly safe to taste, but it's packed with these compounds that a tiny bit of flavoring in gin is one thing, but a mouthful of it's another. It's the least favorite plant for deer. They will eat. Right. And there's so many deer that they pretty much eat everything else. And so they eat everything else, and what's left is the juniper. Right. And a major expense of running a ranch around here, you've probably seen this, is you use, often it's an ATV now, all-terrain vehicle with these huge big tree shears. Have any of you ever seen these? They're huge. I mean, they're called shears, but they're giant blades. And it's, that will go where a bulldozer cannot, and it does less damage to the soil. But people also bulldoze these. Ranches are always cleared. They should burn.
Right.
They should burn. People are scared of fire. And also, if the cattle have eaten all the grass, it's very hard to keep a fire burning. Right. You have to back off on the grazing. See, what we do has very practical relationships to ranch management. Anytime you're interested in any kind of applied field, and medicine is applied biology, public health is applied biology, conservation is if you're just the scientist, you're only part of the equation. You're just one member of the team. and you don't control, I mean, frankly, you don't control the winning cards here. The public opinion and money very, very often are the controlling factors. Just like those vaccines were never developed, the endangered species, there's no willpower to buy the land and manage it to protect them. This kind of thing. It comes down to money and public opinion, and then politics, which is the sort of the nexus of, it's how we express. Oh, if I could have all the money I wanted to spend, I would buy a big enough piece of land to manage properly, which is on the order of 20,000 acres around here. You could burn it then and put the money into deer fencing, a burn program, all those, and just try out these ideas we have, test out these scientific ideas on a big enough scale, on a really big scale, instead of the kind of small experiments that we can get the money to do, and manage it for conservation, manage it for biodiversity, plants and animals. One of the things people don't realize is there's good bacteria and there's bad bacteria in terms of our human guts. They compete with each other. It is that community, just like the plant community I'm studying. It's following the same basic concepts and rules. Evolution works on it, only very fast because they're bacteria. So antibiotics are very widely overprescribed, often for viral diseases, and antibiotics do not work on viruses. But one of the problems with that is evolutionary, that we're evolving antibiotic resistance, and it's a huge public health problem. And if any of you, I hope it never happens, get an antibiotic-resistant infection, it's like rolling the clock back 100 years ago, before antibiotics. It's so bad. If you have MRSA, multiple resistant Staph aureus, you might as well be back in 1940 or 1920, before antibiotics. Same with some of the TB strains. And that's overprescription of antibiotics has led to that. So that's evolution in action, but the other thing in action is more and more we realize that human health is a function of the health of your microbiota. That if you take antibiotics and you strip out your gut bacteria, for example, you can typically get pretty sick. And they're actually talking about developing disease treatments involving inoculating people with the good intestinal bacteria to try to help a lot of different diseases that they think this might be related to. So that is ecology, although it's not called ecology. To something that is called ecology and affects medical, the environment is full of more and more novel compounds that plants and animals haven't had a chance to evolve with. And we look at their effects on animals, and we see, for example, there's a famous case where the alligators in a Florida lake, the male alligators were all turning into female. And it turns out that there was a chemical plant that was releasing an estrogenic plastic, I think it was a plastic compound. A lot of plastics are mildly estrogenic. And so we see this in the environment. We also see pesticides. We see frogs with 6 legs instead of 4, due to atrazine and so on. Well, these things affect people too. These mildly estrogenic compounds are thought to be the reason that male sperm count has fallen so dramatically in recent decades. So much so that if you go in for infertility treatment, used to be always just checked out the women, they assumed the guys were fine. Now it's usually 50-50, and a low sperm count and low sperm motility is routinely a problem and has to be addressed as well. We think all the plastics that are mildly estrogenic, all the fire retardant chemicals, there's so many chemicals, they're very, very, very mildly estrogenic. It's like taking your sister's birth control pills or anything. They're very mildly estrogenic, but enough of them can really cause problems. This is effectively ecology in action.